The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Command Base in Coronado, California. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her olive green uniform one final time before stepping into the administrative building. At 28, she had already served 3 tours overseas as a communications specialist, but today marked a different kind of mission entirely. The corridors buzzed with the familiar sounds of military efficiency. Marines in crisp uniforms moved with purpose, their boots creating a rhythmic percussion against the polished floors. Maria had requested this meeting weeks ago, and after numerous delays and rescheduling, Colonel James Morrison had finally agreed to see her. She knocked twice on the heavy oak door marked with Morrison's nameplate. A gruff voice from within called for her to enter. The office was exactly what she had expected from a career military officer who had climbed the ranks through decades of unwavering dedication. Awards and commendations lined the walls. Photographs of Morrison with various dignitaries occupied every available surface, and behind his massive desk hung an American flag that had clearly seen deployment in multiple theaters of operation. Colonel Morrison looked up from a stack of paperwork, his steel-gray eyes immediately sizing up the young woman before him. At 55, he had spent more time in combat zones than most soldiers spent in their entire careers. His weathered face bore the marks of someone who had made countless life-and-death decisions, and his reputation for being both fair and uncompromising preceded him throughout the base. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. "I understand you have a rather unusual request to discuss with me today." Maria sat down, maintaining perfect posture despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. She had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but sitting across from one of the most respected officers in the command structure suddenly made her prepared words seem inadequate. "Yes, sir. I'm requesting permission to participate in the upcoming inter-service marksmanship competition that's being held here next month. I believe I can represent our unit effectively and demonstrate the high standards of training we maintain." Morrison leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The expression wasn't particularly encouraging. He picked up a file from his desk and flipped through several pages, occasionally glancing up at Maria with what appeared to be amusement. "Staff Sergeant, I see here that you're a communication specialist. Your primary duties involve radio operations, signal intelligence, and coordination between units. While I'm sure you've completed the standard marksmanship training required for all personnel, this competition isn't exactly designed for support staff." The dismissive tone in his voice was unmistakable, though he maintained the professional courtesy required by military protocol. Maria felt her jaw tighten slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sir, with respect, I've consistently scored expert ratings on all my weapons qualifications. I've also spent considerable personal time at the firing ranges, working to improve my skills beyond the minimum requirements." Morrison set down the file and folded his hands on his desk. "Santos, let me be clear about something. This competition draws participants from special operations units across all branches of the military. We're talking about Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, Air Force Pararescue. These aren't your typical weekend warriors or support personnel looking to pad their service records." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "The men competing in this event have undergone some of the most rigorous training programs in the world. They eat, sleep, and breathe weapons proficiency. Many of them have confirmed kills in active combat situations. This isn't a place for someone to prove a point or make a statement about equality in the ranks." Maria felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Colonel, I'm not asking to make a statement. I'm asking for the opportunity to compete based on my abilities, not my job description or gender." Morrison chuckled, and the sound carried an edge that made Maria's resolve strengthen rather than waver. "Your abilities? Santos, I've been in this business for over 30 years. I've seen plenty of soldiers who thought they were ready for challenges beyond their scope. The result is usually embarrassment for them and their unit. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the training grounds where various exercises were taking place. Several groups of SEALs were conducting physical training, their movements precise and coordinated despite the intensity of their workout. "You see those men out there?" Morrison pointed toward the training area. "Each one of them has spent years perfecting their craft. They've been pushed to their absolute limits and beyond. When they pick up a weapon, it becomes an extension of their body. They don't just shoot targets. They neutralize threats in conditions that would break most people." Maria stood as well, moving to join him at the window. "Sir, I understand the caliber of competition I would be facing. I'm not asking for special consideration or modified standards. I simply want the chance to prove that skill and dedication aren't exclusive to special operations units." Morrison turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "Santos, let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone shooting back at you while you're trying to line up a shot? Have you ever had to take a human life to protect your teammates? Have you ever operated for days without sleep while maintaining the precision necessary to make shots at distances exceeding 800 meters? No, sir. I haven't had those specific experiences. But I've trained extensively, and I believe that fundamental marksmanship skills translate across different scenarios." The colonel walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. "This conversation is starting to feel like a waste of both our time. The answer is no, Santos. I'm not going to put you in a position where you'll be outclassed by some of the finest marksmen in the military. It wouldn't be fair to you, and it wouldn't reflect well on this command." Maria remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back. "Sir, what if I could demonstrate my abilities beforehand? What if I could show you that I belong in that competition?" Morrison looked up at her with what might have been admiration for her persistence, though his tone remained skeptical. "And how exactly do you propose to do that, Staff Sergeant?" "Give me a chance to shoot alongside some of your best marksmen, set up a qualification course, bring in whoever you want to observe, and let my performance speak for itself. If I can't meet the standard, I'll withdraw my request and never bring it up again." The colonel drummed his fingers on his desk, considering her proposal. After a long moment, he shook his head. "Santos, you're either very confident or very naive, probably both." "Maybe, sir, but I'm also very determined." Morrison smiled again, but this time there was something different in his expression. "You know what? Fine. I'll arrange a little demonstration. We'll set up a shooting exercise next Friday afternoon. I'll invite some of our SEAL instructors to observe, and we'll see what you're made of." Maria felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous energy. "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you." "Oh, I'm quite certain you will disappoint me, Santos. The question is whether you'll learn something valuable from the experience." He picked up his pen, clearly signaling that the meeting was over. "Report to Range 7 at 1400 hours next Friday. Bring your A-game, because everyone else certainly will be." As Maria left the colonel's office, she could hear him chuckling quietly to himself. Walking through the corridors, she realized that she had just committed herself to something that would either validate her confidence or humiliate her in front of some of the most skilled marksmen in the military. The next week would be crucial. She would need to spend every available moment preparing, refining her technique, and mentally preparing for what was likely to be the most challenging shooting experience of her life. But as she stepped out into the California sunshine, Maria felt a grin spreading across her face. She had gotten exactly what she wanted, a chance to prove herself. Now all she had to do was deliver on her promise. The week leading up to Friday passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Maria arrived at the base firing range every morning before dawn, long before the official training schedule began. She brought her own ammunition, purchased with money from her modest military salary, and methodically worked through every shooting position and scenario she could imagine. Her routine became almost ritualistic. She would begin with breathing exercises, centering herself before even touching her weapon. Then came the fundamentals: stance, grip, sight alignment, trigger control. She practiced with her standard issue M16, but also requested time with various other weapons systems to broaden her familiarity. The range safety officer, a grizzled master sergeant named Williams who had been overseeing weapons training for nearly 2 decades, began arriving earlier just to watch her practice sessions. Initially skeptical of what he assumed was a publicity stunt, he found himself genuinely impressed by her dedication and methodical approach to improvement. "You know, Santos," he said on Thursday morning as she finished a particularly challenging series of shots at varying distances, "I've seen a lot of soldiers come through here thinking they're hot shots. Most of them are all talk and no substance. You, on the other hand, actually put in the work." Maria wiped sweat from her brow and began cleaning her weapon. "Thank you, Master Sergeant. I know what I'm up against tomorrow. I can't afford to be anything less than perfect." Williams nodded approvingly. "Perfect is a tall order, especially with the audience you'll have. Word has gotten around about your little challenge. Half the base is talking about it." That evening, Maria lay in her barracks bunk, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She could hear whispered conversations from other rooms, and she was certain she caught her name mentioned more than once. The pressure was mounting, and she found herself questioning whether her confidence had crossed the line into dangerous overconfidence. Friday afternoon arrived with typical Southern California weather: clear skies, mild temperatures, and a gentle breeze that would affect long-distance shots. Maria arrived at Range 7 30 minutes early, carrying her gear bag and wearing her standard combat uniform with sleeves rolled up to regulation length. The range itself was impressive even by military standards. It stretched nearly 1,000 meters and featured multiple firing positions, target systems at various distances, and observation areas for instructors and evaluators. What caught Maria's attention immediately, however, was the gathering crowd of observers. Colonel Morrison stood near the range control booth, talking quietly with several other officers she recognized but had never personally met. More intimidating were the dozen or so enlisted men in Navy uniforms who were clearly not ordinary sailors. Their bearing, physical conditioning, and the casual confidence in their movements marked them as special operations personnel. Master Sergeant Williams approached Maria as she set down her gear. "Santos, let me introduce you to some of the people who will be evaluating your performance today." The first man he brought over was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, a SEAL instructor whose reputation extended far beyond the base. Rodriguez had multiple combat deployments and was known for his exceptional skill with both precision rifles and close-quarters weapons. He greeted Maria with professional courtesy, though she could see skepticism in his eyes. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Rodriguez said, extending his hand. "I've heard interesting things about your request to join our little competition. I have to admit I'm curious to see what you can do." Before Maria could respond, another voice cut through the conversation. "We're all curious, Chief. This should be educational for everyone involved." The speaker was Petty Officer First Class Jake Sullivan, whose tone carried unmistakable condescension. Sullivan was younger than Rodriguez, but had built a reputation as one of the finest marksmen in his unit. His comment drew chuckles from several other SEALs who had gathered nearby. Colonel Morrison stepped forward, clearly ready to begin the proceedings. "Gentlemen and Staff Sergeant Santos, thank you all for being here today. We're going to conduct a comprehensive marksmanship evaluation using our standard Special Operations Qualification course." He gestured toward the range. The course consists of 5 stages, each designed to test different aspects of shooting ability. We'll start with precision shooting at 200 meters from supported positions, then move to 300 meters with limited support, followed by 500-meter shots from prone position. The 4th stage involves rapid target engagement at multiple distances, and will finish with a stress shooting scenario. Maria felt her heart rate increase as Morrison continued the briefing. This was more comprehensive than she had expected, and significantly more challenging than the standard infantry marksmanship tests she was accustomed to. Each participant will fire the same course using the same weapon system, Morrison continued. We'll be using the M14 designated marksman rifle with standard military optics. Scoring will be based on accuracy, time to complete each stage, and overall consistency across all 5 stages. Rodriguez stepped forward. Colonel, respectfully, shouldn't we start Staff Sergeant Santos with something more basic? This course was designed for personnel who've spent years developing advanced marksmanship skills. Morrison smiled. Chief, the staff sergeant specifically requested to be evaluated alongside your best marksman. I think we should give her exactly what she asked for. The first stage began 20 minutes later. Maria found herself shooting alongside 4 SEAL marksmen who treated the exercise with professional seriousness despite their obvious skepticism about her presence. The M14 rifle felt different from her usual weapon, heavier and with a more pronounced recoil, but she adapted quickly. From the 200-meter supported position, she fired her first 5-round group. The spotters called back her results, all 5 shots within a 3-inch circle, with 2 nearly touching the center of the target. It was a solid performance, though not exceptional by the standards of the men shooting alongside her. Sullivan, shooting from the position next to hers, fired his group with casual efficiency. His shots formed an even tighter cluster, demonstrating the kind of precision that comes from thousands of hours of practice. He glanced over at Maria's target and nodded slightly, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or mere politeness. The second stage proved more challenging. With limited support at 300 meters, Maria had to rely more heavily on her fundamental shooting skills. The wind had picked up slightly, requiring adjustments that she made based more on instinct than extensive experience. Her group opened up somewhat, but remained well within qualification standards. Rodriguez, observing from behind the firing line, found himself paying closer attention to Maria's technique than he had expected. Her breathing was controlled, her trigger manipulation was smooth, and she took appropriate time between shots without falling behind the pace set by the exercise. By the third stage, shooting prone at 500 meters, Maria had found her rhythm with the unfamiliar rifle. The longer distance required more precise calculations for wind and elevation, but her months of dedicated practice showed in her methodical approach to each shot. She finished the stage with a respectable score that placed her solidly in the middle of the group. It was during the 4th stage that something shifted. The rapid target engagement phase required shooters to engage multiple targets at varying distances within strict time limits. The scenario was designed to simulate combat conditions where speed and accuracy had to be balanced under pressure. Maria's performance in this stage surprised everyone, including herself. The months of intensive practice had developed her muscle memory to a degree that allowed her to transition between targets smoothly and efficiently. Her shot placement remained consistently accurate, even as she increased her pace to meet the time requirements. Sullivan, who had been leading the group through the first 3 stages, made an uncharacteristic error during a rapid transition that cost him valuable points. He shook his head in frustration, clearly annoyed with himself for the mistake. Colonel Morrison, who had been watching quietly from the observation area, found himself leaning forward with increased interest. The staff sergeant was performing better than he had anticipated, and her improvement seemed to accelerate as the course progressed. The 5th and final stage was the stress shooting scenario, designed to test performance under simulated combat conditions. Shooters had to navigate a course while engaging targets at various distances and positions, all while carrying additional equipment and operating under significant time pressure. Maria approached this final challenge with the same methodical preparation she had used throughout the evaluation. She checked her gear, verified her ammunition count, and took several deep breaths before signaling her readiness to begin. What happened next would become legendary among the personnel who witnessed it, though the full implications wouldn't become clear until much later that afternoon. The stress shooting course began with Maria moving through a simulated urban environment, carrying 40 pounds of additional equipment while engaging targets that appeared at unexpected angles and distances. The course was designed to push even experienced special operations personnel to their limits, combining physical exertion with the mental demands of precise marksmanship. Maria started strong, moving efficiently between positions while maintaining excellent shot placement on her initial targets. The additional weight of the equipment affected her differently than it did the SEALs, who were accustomed to carrying much heavier loads, but she compensated with superior shooting technique and careful movement planning. Halfway through the course, something extraordinary began to happen. While the other shooters showed signs of fatigue affecting their accuracy, Maria seemed to settle into a zone where the physical demands actually improved her focus. Her breathing remained controlled, her shots became more precise, and her transition times between targets decreased. Chief Rodriguez, monitoring her progress through binoculars, found himself calling out her hits with increasing amazement. Center mass, bullseye, center mass. Each target fell exactly where it should, with shot placement that would have been impressive under ideal conditions, let alone during a physically demanding stress course. Sullivan, who had started the course 30 seconds before Maria, began to hear her catching up behind him. The realization that a communications specialist was matching his pace while maintaining better accuracy than he was managing created a mental pressure he had never experienced in training. His shots began to drift slightly as he tried to increase his speed to maintain his lead. Colonel Morrison stood with his arms crossed, watching the unfolding drama with an expression that had evolved from skeptical amusement to genuine surprise to something approaching disbelief. The staff sergeant was not just keeping pace with some of his finest marksmen. She was beginning to outperform them. The course's final challenge required shooters to engage a series of targets at 600 meters while lying prone on uneven ground with a strong crosswind. This was where the evaluation typically separated truly exceptional marksmen from merely competent ones. The combination of distance, environmental factors, and accumulated fatigue had broken many promising shooters in the past. Maria approached the final firing position methodically, taking time to study the wind indicators and calculate her adjustments despite the pressure of the ticking clock. She settled into her prone position with the same careful attention to fundamentals that had characterized her entire performance. Her first shot at 600 meters struck the center of the target so precisely that the impact was visible even without magnification. The range safety officer called out, "Bullseye," with surprise evident in his voice. Her second shot landed less than an inch from the first. By her third shot, everyone on the range had stopped what they were doing to watch. Sullivan, finishing his own sequence of shots, looked back to see Maria completing what appeared to be a perfect run through the most challenging portion of the course. For the first time in his military career, he experienced the humbling realization that he was watching someone perform at a level he might never achieve. Rodriguez, who had completed his course run earlier, joined Morrison at the observation point. "Colonel, I need to see those targets up close. What we're witnessing doesn't seem possible for someone without extensive special operations training." The final scoring took place 30 minutes later, with all participants and observers gathered around the range control station. Master Sergeant Williams tabulated the results with the careful precision of someone who understood the significance of what had just occurred. "Gentlemen and Staff Sergeant Santos," Colonel Morrison announced, holding the score sheets in his hand. "I'll give you the final results in order of finish." The atmosphere was thick with tension as Morrison began reading the scores. In fifth place, Petty Officer Second Class Thompson, with a total score of 847 out of a possible 1,000 points. Fourth place goes to Petty Officer First Class Martinez, 863 points. Third place Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, 891 points. Rodriguez nodded acknowledgement of his score, though his attention was focused entirely on the remaining two competitors. Second place, Morrison continued, Petty Officer First Class Sullivan, with 9 to 12 points, an exceptional performance that would typically win this evaluation. Sullivan's face remained impassive, though Maria could see the tension in his jaw. She felt her own heart pounding as she realized what Morrison's pause meant. And in first place, with a score of 967 points, the highest score ever recorded on this course by any shooter in any service branch, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. The silence that followed Morrison's announcement stretched for what felt like minutes. Several of the SEALs looked at each other as if seeking confirmation that they had heard correctly. Rodriguez shook his head slowly, a smile of genuine admiration spreading across his face. Sullivan was the first to speak. "Colonel, I'd like to request permission to examine those targets personally. Not because I doubt the scoring, but because I need to see for myself what perfect marksmanship looks like." Morrison handed him the target sheets, and Sullivan studied them with the intensity of someone analyzing a master's artwork. The shot groups were tighter than anything he had achieved in years of training, with several targets showing multiple bullets passing through nearly identical holes. "Santos," Sullivan said, looking up from the targets, "I owe you an apology. What you accomplished today was extraordinary. I've never seen shooting like this from anyone, regardless of their background or training." Chief Rodriguez stepped forward and extended his hand to Maria. "Staff Sergeant, it would be an honor to have you compete alongside our unit. I think you'll find that the inter-service competition will be much more interesting with you participating." Colonel Morrison approached Maria with an expression that mixed respect with bemusement. "Santos, I believe I owe you an apology as well, and more than that, I owe you an explanation of what happens next." He gestured toward the assembled group. "What you demonstrated today changes things significantly. Your marksmanship ability is clearly at a level that few people ever achieve. The question now becomes how we best utilize that talent." Maria found herself struggling to process what had just happened. The months of preparation had been focused entirely on proving herself worthy of competition, but she had never considered what might happen if she exceeded everyone's expectations so dramatically. "Sir, I appreciate everyone's confidence, but I still just want the opportunity to represent our unit in the competition." Morrison smiled. "Santos, you're going to do much more than represent our unit. I'm recommending you for advanced marksmanship instructor training and placement with our Special Operations Training Command. What you showed today shouldn't be wasted on a single competition." Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "Staff Sergeant, you have skills that could benefit countless personnel across multiple service branches. Have you ever considered transitioning to a more specialized role?" The conversation that followed lasted well into the evening, as plans began forming for Maria's expanded role in advanced weapons training. The woman who had walked onto Range 7 as a communications specialist, hoping for a chance to compete, was leaving as someone whose exceptional abilities had opened doors she had never imagined existed. As the group finally dispersed, and Maria packed her gear for the last time as just another soldier hoping to prove herself, she reflected on the day's events. She had set out to demonstrate that she belonged among elite marksmen. Instead, she had shown that sometimes the most extraordinary abilities emerge from the most unexpected places. Sullivan approached her as she finished cleaning her rifle. "Santos, I need to ask you something. How long have you been shooting at this level? Because what happened today doesn't come from a few months of practice." Maria smiled as she secured her weapon in its case. "Jake, I think some people are born with certain abilities. The trick is having enough determination to develop them fully, regardless of what other people think is possible." Colonel Morrison, overhearing the conversation, added his own observation. "What happened here today will be talked about for years. But more importantly, it's going to change how we think about identifying and developing exceptional talent, regardless of where we find it. The following Monday, Maria's request to compete in the inter-service marksmanship competition was not only approved, but expanded to include her participation as an instructor and mentor for other competitors. Her performance had transformed what was meant to be a simple qualification into a career-defining moment that would influence military marksmanship training for years to come. The communications specialist who had been mocked for her ambitious request had become the marksman who would redefine what was considered possible.